morning. I'd like to call the regularly scheduled Planning Commission meeting for January 4th, 2018 to order. If you would, please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance.
Allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you very much. Staff, are there any changes?
Good morning, Commissioners. There are. We have two. The first one is PDMU 1720P, which is the Villas at Lockwood Ridge. There's revisions to the staff report and public comment letter attached to your memo. And the second is PDR 1707ZP, which is Braden River Shores, and there are revised staff report maps attached to your memo. This concludes the changes.
Thank you. Ms. Shank, is there anything from
No
the-
changes, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. All right. I don't believe we had any minutes, did we?
No.
No? Okay. All right, thank you. So the next thing, we'll open the hearing to public comment. This is an opportunity to speak on anything that's not on today's agenda. So if there's anybody who wishes to make a statement on something, again, that is not on today's agenda, please come forward. Okay, seeing nobody come forward, we're going to close the public comment portion and move on to the regular agenda. Yes, ma'am. If you could, if you plan on speaking today, if you would please rise to be sworn in. Again, both these items are quasi-judicial and they require that you be sworn in to provide testimony.
Do you swear or affirm that the factual statements and factual representations which you're about to present to this board will be truthful and accurate? Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have nothing on the consent agenda, but we do have an item. Item number one is a presentation upon request, and Commissioner Rhodes had indicated that he's going to want to hear at least an abbreviated presentation. So, Ms. Knapp, could you please read item number one into the record?
Item number one is PDMU 1720P, Manatee Fruit Company, the Villas at Lockwood Ridge. This is a preliminary site plan for 84 single-family semi-detached residential units on approximately 37 acres in the Res 6 future land use category and is zoned planned development mixed use, generally located at the northwest corner of Lockwood Ridge Road and 63rd Avenue East.
Thank you very much. For the commissioners, have there been any ex parte communications regarding this matter?
Yes, sir.
Okay, seeing none for the record. All right, Mr. Rhodes, this is a presentation upon request. Was there any specific item that you'd like the presentation to focus upon?
If possible, I'd just like it to focus on the exceptions
Yep.
that they're requesting and then the stipulations associated with it. And also, I had read in two articles in the paper and that kind of a thing, Tom, this might affect you, where they were saying that property is prone to flooding in the past, so if we could just address those, I'd appreciate it.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Boyd, are you for staff on this? If you could just do a brief introduction, and then we'll ask the applicant to provide more detail.
Good morning. Tia Boyd, planner for Manatee County, and I have been sworn. As stated by Ms. Knapp, this is for a preliminary site plan for 84 single-family semi-detached residential units on approximately 37.19 acres in the residential 6 future land use category and is zone plan development mixed use at the corner of Lockwood Ridge Road and 63rd Avenue East. At this time, I'd like to call Rachel Layton.
Thank you very much.
Good morning. I'm Rachel Layton with ZNS Engineering. I'm an AICP planner. And to just introduce myself to Commissioner Roth, I've been practicing for 20 years, and the bulk of it's been here in Manatee County. We would like to be able to give a brief presentation just so that we kind of are putting everything on the record today, and I will try and focus my comments to you, Mr. Commissioner Rhodes, but I'd like to start with Michael Neal.
And you have been.
I have been sworn, yes.
Yeah.
Hi, good morning. My name is Michael Neal. I have been sworn. Here representing Neal Communities. It's a pleasure to have the opportunity to speak to you all today, and especially Mr. Roth. Welcome. So we're here to present the Villas of Lockwood Ridge project, which you heard is 84 semi-detached units. This company, Neal Communities, has been building in Manatee County for over 45 years, with over 13,000 homes built, the majority of them here in Manatee County. So we're a third-generation family-owned builder. My whole family lives and works here in Manatee County. We're very familiar with this particular submarket. We have 3 successful projects in the immediate vicinity that you'll hear more about. Mandalay across the street, Woodbrook also across the street, and then most recently, Villa Amalfi, which is a neighboring development we developed in the last 3 years with the same planning and engineering team. It's been highly successful. This project is very similar. We believe that this project will similarly be successful without any impacts to neighbors and the community. So follow me will be Rachel Layton and also Ivory Crowfoot at Neal Communities.
Thank you.
Rachel Layton again, I have been sworn. To just kind of orient you guys where the site is, we are at the northwest corner there of Lockwood Ridge and 63rd Avenue East. The property is 37.19 acres in size, and there's a wetland of just under 16 acres. It's 15.95 acres in size. We are proposing no impacts to the wetlands with the preliminary site plan design. So you can see here in the center of the site is that very large wetland. Future land use category is Res 6 and is surrounded by Res 6 on all sides. Res 6 allows a maximum gross residential density of 6 dwelling units per acre and a net residential density of 12 units per acre. The proposed gross density within the limits of the Res 6 future land use the proposed gross density is within the limits. With 84 units on 37 acres, there are 2.26 dwelling units per acre for the gross density and 2.93 dwelling units per net acre. So we're well below those limits that are allowed by the comprehensive plan. And these density calculations are based on the policies of the comp plan. Special approval is required for the projects within Watershed Protection Overlay District and a project in which density is transferred from part of a wetland site to another part of the same site. We're requesting these special approvals in compliance with the Land Development Code and the Comprehensive Plan. Plan development is the process necessary to achieve the special approval. The property is zoned PDMU. In 2000, the Board of County Commissioners approved ordinance PDMU 00-02 to allow for 600 single-family lots, 146,000 square feet of commercial space, and an option to exchange 140,000 square feet of commercial building space for 224 multifamily units. The property was developed largely for the single family, with the exception of the proposed parcel for our villas at Lockwood Ridge. This parcel had the potential for the 140,000 square feet of commercial or 224 multifamily units. That approval has expired, but as we went through all of the planning documents, we noticed that Barrington Ridge was designed with the knowledge that multifamily or commercial uses might go on the property that we're now proposing for 84 single-family semi-detached units. So you can see this area is very well built out. What we're talking about is an infill residential development. We have Barrington Ridge to the north of us. We have Mandalay and Woodbrook to the east of us. Those are both Neal Communities. We have Villa Amalfi, also a Neal Communities project. We have the Cascades. We have Prospect Point. These are all very large subdivisions and are in compliance with that Res 6 density that's allowed in the future land use. The preliminary site plan itself proposes 84 single-family semi-detached units, again on 37 acres. And the gross density, again, is 2.26. To protect the wetlands, the site design is a clustered residential subdivision. This is encouraged by Comprehensive Plan Policy 2.6.2.7, which requires clustering to limit impacts of residential development on environmentally sensitive lands. The comprehensive plan allows for a variety of lot sizes and residential land use categories. Additionally, current planning trends are for smaller lot sizes with greater open space. The proposed open space for this project is 70%, where 35% is what's required by the Land Development Code. This accounts for 25 acres of the 37-acre site. The project design proposes no impacts to the wetlands. We do have a small wetland buffer impact proposed. It is at 3,000 square feet, which is less than 1/10 of an acre, and that allows us to be able to build the roads that we need to serve this development, which is allowed by the Land Development Code. Primary access to the site is proposed on 63rd Avenue East. We do have an emergency egress only proposed on Lockwood Ridge. So only if there's a need for emergency vehicles to leave the property, that's the only access that's proposed on Lockwood Ridge. I want to be very clear that that's not for use by the residents, only emergency. Because we understand that there are concerns from the residents of anyone exiting from the subdivision. We are proposing a 40-foot right-of-way, which is a little bit unusual, but we're doing that so that we can avoid any wetland impacts. The update memo that was included in your package for today shows the 40-foot is in compliance with county regulations, and it's really so that we can avoid any impacts again, and it is an appropriate design. The project design provides for an enhanced water quality by providing 150% water quality treatment for Braden River watershed. The project design will improve drainage conditions on site and reduce the pre-development runoff by 25%. The wetlands again are preserved and nearly 70% of the site remains open space. The cluster design allows for the protection of the environmentally sensitive lands. The roadway buffers are one of our specific approvals, and those are designed at 15 feet. Again, that's to avoid any impacts to the wetland. So that's all of the specific approvals that we have associated with the project are so that we don't have to encroach into that wetland at all, and so that we minimize any impacts to the wetland buffer, which will be mitigated on site. Along 63rd Avenue East, adjacent to the wetland, the project design will exceed the roadway buffer requirement and will be designed to enhance the wetland buffer. So this area in green on the site plan here will be an enhanced area so that we're blending the roadway buffer requirements and the wetland buffer requirements in that area. And then we've got the stormwater pond, and then we have lots, where we have those lots along 63rd and Lockwood Ridge is where we have the 15-foot buffer proposed, and then the internal 40-foot roadways. And then we also have a 20-foot front yard setback. So all of those things are in our design so that we avoid any impacts, minimize everything we can. The project design is in compliance with the Land Development Code. The project represents infill development in a developed area with existing municipal services. The project meets the goals, objectives, and policies of the comprehensive plan in the Res 6 category, as well as several other important policies. Comprehensive Plan Policy 2.9.1 encourages development of a variety of housing options and architectural styles within a community. Comprehensive Plan 2.9.1.10 provides for the integration and assimilation of smaller residential infill parcels into existing neighborhoods by encouraging consistency with building setbacks, dwelling unit sizes, and building heights. Policy 2.6.2.7 requires clustering to limit impacts of residential development on environmentally sensitive lands. The proposed project is the logical progression of residential development and is consistent with the comprehensive plan. I'd like to introduce Ivory Crowfoot.
Good morning, Commissioners. I'm Nathan Crott with ZNS Engineering, and I'm not Ivory. So I'm being brought in to specifically address Mr. Rhodes' question with regards to flooding.
And you have been sworn?
Yes, I have been sworn.
Thank you.
If you could go back to the site plan for me for just a minute on the screen. So we are not aware that this site historically floods. A portion of the site is within the 100-year floodplain for the Braden River watershed. We have not designed the site to date as far as a final site plan, construction plan level. However, we are aware that the wetland itself, obviously a large portion of the site is a wetland, and that would obviously be wet. And then it connects to Lockwood Ridge to the east through a ditch, and that is the portion of the site that is within that floodplain. And we would model this site and that connection through the software and through Mr. Gershenberger and his department to ensure that there would be no adverse flooding. But again, we are not aware of any historical flooding on this site, specifically the uplands where the development will take place. I will now introduce Ivory Crowfoot.
Good morning.
Hello, good morning. Ivory Crowfoot, and I've been sworn. I am the Community Relations and Government Affairs Director at Neal. I'm a seven-year team member. At Neal, it's our goal to be an active part of the community. With this project, we made sure that we reached out to the surrounding neighbors. We've had 4 meetings, as well as an HOA meeting with Barrington Ridge. We've had several communications with them to make sure that they understood what our project was and to answer any questions. It's our goal that as neighbors that we are an outlet for them to ask any questions, voice any concerns, and make sure we address those during this process. If approved, we continue to have that communication with our neighbors. We want to make sure through every step of development that we're able to address any concerns. I know, this project hasn't been developed over 15 years when Centex originally told their neighbors that there was going to be something there, and so there were a lot of questions. And Michael, Neal, and I have made sure that we address those with the residents. Our team is here for any questions. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to change it up a little bit, and we're going to go and open the citizen comments portion before we go to questions. So if there's anybody in the audience who wishes to come forward and make a statement on this project, this application, please come forward at this time. Anyone at all? Okay, seeing no one come forward, we're going to close the public comment portion of this hearing, and we're going to open it up for questions from the commission. Mr. Rutledge.
Forgive my uncertainty, but Ms. Boyd, may I ask you a question?
Questions for applicant or the staff at this time? Yes.
Good morning. I'm still stunned by your previous presentation, so I want you to know there's an afterglow of your success. So are you familiar with the recent study that ULI did up in Hillsborough County where they recommended the I-4 corridor have better density and more green spaces? Did you see this come out recently?
I'm not familiar with that study.
But it's more of a contemporary approach to how things are developed. And it seems to me that this kind of follows that model, which is let's protect our wetlands, let's keep big open spaces, and let's go ahead and invite our neighbors to be closer to us than other places. When you were reviewing this, is this kind of the model that you like to see? I mean, is this more consistent with the new approach as opposed to everybody having, 20-foot setbacks from their neighbors and so forth?
Commissioner Rutledge, in reviewing this, we did find that the proposed design was compatible with surrounding neighborhoods and subdivisions in that area, and we also found that it was compatible with the code. So we did think that it was a ideal plan for the area.
Thank you. Any additional questions?
I'd like Tom to make a couple comments if he could.
Okay,
Great.
and I would like to dovetail on that, and after you ask your question, or before you ask your question, Tom, it's been represented that this may be an area of potential flooding, and we heard the applicant's consultant say that it wasn't anything that was not typical. Of course, we have a wetland. That area, of course, floods frequently, but could you address that specifically? And Mr. Rhodes, was that essentially your
Yes,
question? Okay.
dovetailing onto your comment there.
Yes, thank you.
For the record, Thomas Gerstenberger, Public Works Department, I've been sworn. With respect to your questions, Mr. Chair and Commissioner Rhodes, and just to summarize from what the applicant already described as far as the stormwater features and as far as the stormwater analysis for this particular project. The project itself, it does drain into the Braden River watershed. The actual outfall for this particular project, as was brought up, does drain east underneath Lockwood Ridge Road, and then through Mandalay subdivision, and then along a drainage ditch which runs eastward along the south boundary of Silver Lake subdivision, and ultimately drains into the Evers Reservoir, the water source for the city of Bradenton. The Braden River watershed, for the area of the watershed that is collected within the Evers Reservoir itself, The county does require a 25% reduction in the allowable runoff rate for runoff that is draining directly into the Braden River and ultimately into the Evers Reservoir. There are some tributaries of the Braden River, such as Rattlesnake Slough, which we do require the 50% reduction in allowable runoff that is more commonplace throughout the county as far as the other watersheds, whether it be Pierce Drain or Bowley's Creek, Buffalo Canal, things of that sort. But for Braden River itself, considering we're talking about the water source for the city of Bradenton, the watershed itself, it basically begins from the Palmetto Park, Lakewood Ranch area and drains from there westward towards the Evers Reservoir, and also is picking up and collecting drainage from this area as well. As far as on-site, as was already brought up, the flood insurance rate maps, the FEMA flood insurance rate maps, the latest effective date being March 14th, March of 2014, did not identify 100-year floodplain on this particular project. However, the Braden River Watershed Study, which utilizes best available information, does identify the areas that were identified, the wetlands on site, as 100-year floodplain delineation. Therefore, it's unlikely, especially considering the fact that the applicant is going through and preserving and will not disturb the jurisdictional areas of the wetland, that there would be any impacts to the impoundment areas associated with the wetlands themselves. Just to summarize the stormwater conditions that are included in the staff report, under stormwater conditions, that would be section C within the staff report. There is the requirement for the 25% reduction in allowable runoff. There is the requirement for a floodplain mitigation should there be any impacts into the 100-year floodplain as identified by the Braden River Watershed Study. And then there is also the requirement for 150% water quality treatment, which is a requirement for the Evers Overlay District. I'll be happy to address any further questions that the Planning Commission may have.
Thank you. Any additional questions for Mr. Gerstenberg? Mr. Rutledge?
Yeah, just curious, some of the negative aspects listed in the report say that the 20-foot size, 20-foot setbacks versus the 25 and the reduction in the roadways are negative aspects. Do they have any impact, or is this all kind of adjusted for in your water quality statements and your runoff and flood zone elevations? Those are all considered as conditions for your statement.
Commissioner Rutledge, that is correct. Part of the provisions within the Evers Overlay District is for the reduction.
Easy for you to say.
Yes, thank you. Is for the reduction of impervious areas. It's for clustering, development, things of that sort. So there are provisions within the code and the comprehensive plan for those particular provisions, whether they are to reduce impervious area, whether they are to cluster development, things of that sort within the watershed itself.
Additional questions, Mr. Ron?
Tom, real quick, in this project, would you say that based on the questions regarding flooding and everything, that where the homes are going to be situated would be considered in an X zone for FEMA rather than an AE zone?
Commissioner Ron, that is correct. To look at today's flood insurance rate maps, the whole entire project is located within Zone X, which is areas outside of the 100-year floodplain. So should the day come when the Braden River Watershed Study, those particular areas that are identified and delineated within the 100-year floodplain, based upon that, the watershed study itself be incorporated into the flood insurance rate maps, the developed areas of this project would not be identified within a 100-year floodplain.
Thank you.
Okay, any additional questions? No. Okay, seeing none, we're gonna go to the next portion of the hearing. So we'd have staff closing comments. Are there any staff closing comments? Okay, thank you.
I was just going to say we have nothing at this time.
Drop the mic. Is there a rebuttal from the applicant? Okay, thank you. No rebuttal for the applicant. So we're going to close the public hearing and go to deliberations. Would What is the pleasure of the commission?
I just like to say that I think one of the things that I love about, where I live and being in the community is we've got tremendous wetlands, we've got tremendous vegetation, and wildlife then clusters around that. So when I see this, I'm enthusiastic. In other words, I think people are becoming more engaged in close-knit communities, walkability, a different engagement than we used to have. And this kind of wetland saving, to me, congratulations to the engineering group and Neil for trying to figure out a way to do that. I just think that's the goal of the future. And I think the ULI is telling people to do that. Good science tells us that. So I'm kind of a fan of that. And as long as we protect our water, because I think that's the ultimate thing. I don't care about people's money or some more new homes. But if we've done a good job, Mr. Gerstenberger, of protecting our watershed and our source of water, I'm excited to see something unique and different.
Thank you. Any additional discussion? Okay, the chair will consider a motion.
Mr. Chair.
Mr. Horgan.
Based on the staff report, evidence presented, comments made at the public hearing, and finding the request to be consistent with the Manatee County Comprehensive Plan and the Manatee County Land Development Code as conditioned herein, I move to recommend approval of the Manatee County Ordinance Number PDMU-17-20, paren P, with stipulations A1, A2, B1 through B5, C1 through C4, and D1 through D2, granting special approval for a project within the watershed overlay districts, and 2, with density is transferred from part of the wetland site to the other part of the same project. Adoption of the findings for the special approvals and granting specific approval of the alternative to the Land Development Code, Section 402.7.D.1, to allow a reduced roadway buffer, Section 402.7.D.7, to allow the reduced front yard setback, and Section 706.7.C, to allow for a variable width wetland buffer as recommended by staff.
Thank you, Mr. Horgan. We have a motion. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Mr. Ron, second. Call the matter to vote. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, like sign. Chair votes aye. Motion passes 7-0. Thank you. Thank you. All right, we're going to go on to item number 2 on the agenda. Item number 2 is McClure Properties, Braden River Shores. Ms. Knapp, can you read item number 2 into the record, please?
Item number 2 is PDR 1707ZP McClure Properties, Braden River Shores. This is a rezone of approximately 79 acres of a total of 140.5 acres, 61.5 acres that are already zoned planned development residential. Generally located almost 2 miles east of US 301, almost 3 miles west of I-75 on the south side of Braden River, and on the north side of 34th Avenue East, or Street East, from suburban agriculture to planned development residential zoning district, and a preliminary site plan for 417 single-family residential detached units.
Thank you. Again, for the record, have there been any ex parte communications with anybody on this application? Okay, again, for the record, none have been disclosed. Introduction by staff. Good morning.
Good morning, Rosina Leider by the staff, and it has been sworn. The site is located I center in the record, north and south of the 26th Avenue East, and the northern portion of the site is already zoned PDR, and the southern portion is A1. And the site is with the Red Street Future Land Use category. Here by the applicant, representing the applicant is Ms. Rachel Layton and Mr. Caleb Grimes.
Thank you. Good morning.
Thank you, Rosina. And I am Caleb Grimes, not Rachel Layton. So I want to do a brief introduction, and then you will get to hear from Rachel, and I have been sworn. I am here, pleased to be here on this project. I'm here on behalf of D.R. Horton, who is the contract purchaser of the site and the proposed developer, and I think we have Ann Mize with us here from D.R. Horton, and also on behalf of McClure Properties, the owner of the site and who have owned this site for many, many years. And Mr. Bob Spencer is here with the McClure Properties. The engineers, as you could probably tell by Rachel Layton, is ZNS Engineering, and Mr. Jeb Mulock is here and has done extensive engineering on the site. And Rachel Layton is our planner, and you heard from her earlier, and you will hear from her on this project describing it. Although the site is basically a pasture, it was farmed for years and is now pretty much cleared, we still had made sure we looked at all the environmental issues, and we have with Eco Consultants, Alec Hoffner here with us today. And we always look at transportation issues, and our transportation planning was done by Michael Yates of the White House Group, who is also here with us today. As you can tell from this list, we always put a lot of work into these planned development projects, and a lot has gone into this site. I want to give you a little brief history about this site because I think it's very important to why we're here today and what you're seeing. The property, as I said, has been owned by the McClure family since the 50s. It's been farmed. It's a site that is now closer to the urban core than it was in the 50s. It was farther out back then. Things have changed. We have Lakewood Ranch. We have everything out east of I-75. And this has now become an infill area. In 2010, the commissioners, following a recommendation by this planning commission, took the then existing designation on the south part of this site, which was Res 1, and they designated it Res 3 to match the northern part of this site, which had always been Res 3. And I think this is very important because, and it kind of goes to what Commissioner Rutledge has been talking about, is that the county recognized at that time, this was in 2010, that due to changes in growth in the county, having a site like this in close to town, develop at 1 density unit per acre, a site served with infrastructure, close to the water and sewer and the plants and everything we have in, it made no sense to keep it at a 1 unit per acre. And doing so results in more of the urban sprawl that we see instead of trying to get things in where we have our infrastructure. And so they placed a Res 3 on this infill site. And I want to read, this was really good. This was an excerpt from the staff report, and this was their summary back in 2010. I wish I'd written this. Urban development has advanced beyond this site, with properties further east in the county developing at much higher densities. This property, designated with a Res 1 future land use category, remains undesirable for residential development when higher densities can be achieved elsewhere. The resulting land use pattern with undeveloped land within central portions of the county is inefficient and has resulted in a waste of resources to allow development in portions of the county where services must be extended or expanded. No longer on the edge of a developing community, this site remains underutilized, and the amendment to a Res 3 FLUC will allow development that is a more efficient use of the land. Fortunately, the vacant and cleared condition of the site offers opportunities for housing development at efficient densities close to the urban core. And so this is what our commission did with this Planning Commission's recommendation. And so what we have today is a request that is really a follow-up on what happened with the redesignation of the site to match the northern site to a Res 3 designation. As Rosina explained, it is a partial rezone to PDR. A large part in the north is already zoned. And it is a site plan for 417 single-family detached units. And so at this time, I want to turn it over to Rachel Layton so that she can describe the project in more detail. Rachel.
Good morning again. I'm Rachel Layton with ZNS Engineering. I'm an AICP planner and have been sworn. So as you heard from staff earlier today, you can see from this aerial, we've got a large portion of the site on the north is 67.5 acres. This is 26th Avenue East. This is 39th Street East. We have about 78 acres of land in the south portion. The future land use map, we are Res 3, as Caleb mentioned just a few minutes ago. I do want to mention that there was another comprehensive plan map amendment that was done in 2015, also by ZNS Engineering for peerage land holdings. And that changed about 100 acres of land to Res 6 and Res 3. So you can see your board, your Planning Commission and your Board of County Commissioners have seen the need for more density in this area of the county as it transitions. So our zoning here, again, a PDR on the north, and that was assigned with the Land Development Code in the 1990s. And then A1 suburban agriculture on the southern portions. And you see again, this 100-acre woods, our peerage land holdings is PDMU. And that project actually was approved for 511 units. So you see that the trend for the increased density in this area for new developments. For the subdivisions nearby, we do have Elwood Park, which was a plat that's about 100 years old, and so those are lower density units there. But you see Elwood Woods actually had a rezone to Res 3. Along the river is actually RSF, let me go back, RSF 3 in certain areas along the river. RSF 3 here is just a little pocket. We've got PDRV adjacent to us. So we have quite a mix of different zoning categories in this area. And that coincides with what you see in the subdivision map for what's happened in the last 30 years, really. Elwood Park, of course, is older and more historical neighborhood. And what we've done is make sure that we have enhanced buffers adjacent to those neighbors. So you also see Sugar Creek. This is a mobile home and RV park. We have Sugar Creek Business Park, we've got the Matsky Complex, we've got 100-acre woods, we've got older La Selva Park, and then, of course, within the city of Bradenton, the villages of Glen Creek, which has been approved for 1,373 units. So you see, again, the increased density that's coming to this part of the county. So our subdivision proposes 417 units on the 140 acres. And that gross density is just under the 3 at 2.9. And our net density, which is allowed at 6, is proposed at 3.26. So we're below what those maximums are for the comprehensive plan. We, of course, designed with comprehensive plan policy 2.9.1 in mind for strong communities. And we have designed this proposed subdivision to be compatible and consistent with the character of the surrounding developments. We have 4 project entrances for this property. We have one for the north half. It's a boulevard entrance that is coming off of 26th Street. We have an emergency access that's also getting us to 26th Avenue East. We have another primary entrance for 39th Street East here at the north end of 26th. And we have 2 more access points on 39th. So one for, this is about 18 lots here, and then another one connecting down at the south end of the project. Both of these roadways are urban collectors according to map 5A, and we have included future right-of-way setbacks in the design on 26th Avenue East and 39th Street East. The internal access will consist of 50-foot rights-of-way for 2-lane streets. Sidewalks are proposed on both sides of the road. The project buffers include 20-foot buffer along 26th Avenue East and 39th Street East. A minimum of a 15-foot perimeter buffer is proposed adjacent to the residential properties. A 50-foot buffer is proposed along the Braden River. So you see at the north end here, we've got a 50-foot buffer. We are proposing 30-foot wetland buffers in this design as well. We have 3 proposed recreational amenity centers creating a passive recreation of about 3 acres for the 140 acres. And these may include pools, cabanas, kayak, and canoe lounges. While 25% open space is required for the project, the design proposes 38% or 53 acres of the site as open space. So again, we're exceeding where we can the limits of the Land Development Code to make a more compatible and consistent project. The lots are proposed at 40 and 50 foot wide by 120 feet deep. The building height is limited to 35 feet, which is what's in the Land Development Code. Signs, lighting, and landscaping will be designed in accordance with the Land Development Code as well. The proposed front yard setbacks are 25 feet, side yard is 5 feet, and rear is 15. So those are all as outlined in the Land Development Code as well. The school district report includes indicates that available capacity exists. Public Safety reviewed and approved the residential emergency evacuation plan, which is normal when we have a project that's partially located in the coastal high hazard area. There are employment opportunities and commercial uses in proximity of the site. Utilities will be extended to the site by the developer. The northern half of the property is subject to riverine flooding. So this is a little bit different, and the engineer will be able to answer specific questions later. The site includes a 3.4 acre floodplain compensation area at the northern end of the project, in addition to 22 acres of stormwater ponds throughout the site. All of the existing runoff from the site, which currently runs to Sugar House Creek, will be redirected to the Braden River, bypassing Sugar House Creek. This is modifying the existing flow patterns, which is not a typical design practice. However, the drainage design is unique to the project and will improve flooding conditions. The proposed design will positively affect existing Sugar House Creek flood stages by diverting the proposed drainage flows for this development. So right now, where it historically flows to Sugar House Creek, we've been working with the stormwater staff, Tom Gerstenberger, to make sure that we're redirecting everything to the Braden River so that we're not increasing, we're actually improving the current situation. The project design will improve drainage conditions on site and reduce pre-development runoff by 50%. Manatee County staff approved the traffic impact statement prepared by White House Group. The report identified two related improvements. The first, to construct a left-bound turn lane at 39th Street East onto 26th Avenue East, and the second, to construct a westbound left turn lane at driveway B west of 39th Street on 26th Avenue East. The roads within the project limits will be widened to 24 feet. Transportation impact fees for the project are estimated at $2 million for the 417 units. And I used the estimate of 1,700 square feet to 2,200 square feet. That's a typical D.R. Horton product. And that is about $5,000 per unit. These impact fees could be applied to road improvements by Manatee County in the area following the construction of this project. The request does include one specific approval. We are asking for sidewalk in lieu of payment for required sidewalks east of 39th Street along both sides of 26th Avenue East. So I don't know if I have my mouse here. This is a more environmentally sensitive area, and we worked with staff to help craft that specific approval and the stipulation for payment in lieu of, because there's swales and there are environmental concerns with wetlands abutting that section of the roadway. So we want to make sure that we're designing and not having any impacts. Quickly, I have Braden River. This is the north portion of the property. We're proposing 141 single-family detached lots at 50 by 120 feet. We are showing an option on the preliminary site plan to reduce the lot depth by 5 feet, which would allow for the potential to increase the roadway buffers. We just wanted to have that option so that we can continue to work to enhance the project design. The western buffer along adjacent to Sugar Creek Mobile Home Park, at the narrowest point is 15, but the average here is about 55 feet for our landscape buffer adjacent to that neighborhood. The buffer along the river is a minimum of 50 feet. At the narrowest, the separation is 105 feet. There are 2 amenity centers on this half of the project, and there is an optional gate at the boulevard entrance aligned with 39th Street East and emergency access to 26th Street. The southern parcels propose 276 lots at 40 by 120 feet. Again, we're asking for the option to have a 5-foot reduction in the lot depth so that we can enhance the project roadway buffers. The western and southern buffers are 25 feet. Again, those are required at 15, but we're providing 25. There is an eagle's nest adjacent to our project, and you can see the red dot here to the west is where our eagle's nest is located, and then you see our radius is here to show where we're not proposing any impacts. We will provide all necessary permits with the Army Corps and every other jurisdiction that's required. The smaller eastern parcel has 18 lots, and we're proposing a fence along the southern portion adjacent to these neighbors. We've worked closely with staff throughout the process. We have a positive staff report. The project is designed to meet the goals, objectives, and policies of the comprehensive plan. We're in compliance with the Land Development Code. The proposed project is compatible with development in the area, and we respectfully request recommendation for approval. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions for the applicant? Mr. Rutledge?
Ms. Layton, I guess the question I have, I was so enthusiastic about your previous submission, and I heard you kind of give us a glimpse that you might do some similar things. So my sensitivity in this really is, again, I have full confidence in Mr. Gerstenberger's protection of the water quality and the flooding and so forth. I'm somewhat sensitive when I look at the overlay on the adjacent water and so forth, that you're getting awfully close and it's getting very aggressively onto that area there. And I just wonder if there was a better way to incorporate the sizing, the roadway widths, the buffers that are on other places, and protect the buffer on the water side. And so it just seems to me that you guys just told us you could do something really kind of creative by consolidating this, and we seem to have lost that thinking in this one. Different designer?
They're two different home builders,
I know.
and this project has fewer specific approvals. What we do have along the river here is, at this narrowest point, is 105, and you can see this is all marshland here. When we get here, it's 190 feet, and then when we get to this corner here, it's 250 feet. So there are some significant setbacks from the river for this project. I'm going to let Caleb help me
Let me
out.
say something here. Commissioner Rutledge, you confused me a little, because if you see by this project, one of the first things we did is we sat down and made sure that we designed it in a way with the work to get away from the Braden River by a very large amount. Even though she said there's a 50-foot buffer, that's what you are required to maintain and say you have. Our narrowest spot is 105 feet. And so when you look at that project and the design, the most of the site is all uplands, farmed. You don't farm in wetlands, over many, many years. And all of the southern part, we just don't have wetland issues, except for on the very far east side, which you can see a little bit on the very far east side. And we've stayed away from all of that. But mainly, we worked very hard at designing this to protect that river and that river system. So I think we did what you're asking about. And I'm not sure, when you look at the project that came before, they had a big wetland and they had a buffer around it. But we went way beyond that with our wetlands.
It's okay. You're not surprised that I'm confusing you, are you really? I mean, but my point is really this. No, I'm not saying
And I
you didn't-
don't disagree with your point. I'm just disagreeing with the conclusion, because I think when we sat down and started talking about this project in the beginning, what you said is what went into our thinking.
And I'm sure you did. And that wasn't my point. My point really was, if you condense the road from 50 feet to 40 feet, and if you took 5 feet off each of these, you could do better. That's my point. Not that you didn't do good. I'm not saying you didn't do good. I'm not finding fault.
And let me tell you about the 40-foot thing.
Okay.
This is something that is very, very new in your code, or in the transportation manual. And it is one of those things that I think your staff is moving into cautiously and slowly to see how it works. And they are trying to do it, and if you read about it, it is in projects that are relatively small, that are usually one way in and out, so that there's not a lot of driving in them up and down, and they are where you can get away with 40-foot right-of-ways and smaller roadways because you don't have quite as many cars. The project you had before was 84 lots. We've done it, you saw one recently at the Cortez Peninsula, because that was 86 lots. And so what we have here is a situation, and I certainly would encourage staff to discuss it, a situation where we are more traditional with a larger subdivision, where staff we've not done one at this size with that smaller lots yet. I'm sure that D.R. Horton would be more than willing to do that, but it was one of those where we were trying to be consistent with what staff has done. And I don't disagree with the suggestion, but in this particular project with 417 units, it's not one that's been done to my knowledge. And when you read the situation on when you can do it, it encourages it in the smaller private area.
And not to belabor a point, because it's so unlike me, but The only thing I say is I'm enthusiastic about the progression we're making. I think it always on the forefront of these things, it's how far can we go? And if you split up the 417 units, you now get down to 200. If you look at how many are further back in this and on the backside, you might argue that the real impact on maybe the northeast corridor road might be adjusted because that's where you come off the road. I'm not an engineer,
I have
but
a
I slept at a
suggestion.
Holiday Inn.
Yeah, I have a suggestion. I think this is something that our engineer, Mr. Mulock, and our traffic consultant, Michael Yates, should talk to these gentlemen over here between
agree.
now and the county commission. And like I said, this is, you know, we're a little afraid to go in to ask for 40 feet in one like this when it's brand new, it's not been done, and it's being done in the very small where you have fewer cars.
Again, I just think it goes back to a new
But we'll
approach.
definitely talk to them about it.
Thank you, sir.
Good suggestion.
Thank you. Any other questions for the applicant at this time? Okay, seeing none. Does staff wish to make a presentation?
Again, Rosina Leider by staff. I'm going to do a brief presentation to remark part of the aspect that we take in consideration for our recommendation. This is the request that is to rezone close to 78 acres from A to PDR and approve the preliminary site plan for 417 units. This is an aerial that shows the general area that is an area that is in transition from suburban agriculture or suburban residential uses to more urban characteristic. The site, like I said, the northern portion is PDR, and this was designated with the Land Development Code in 1990, and the southern portion is A1. And like Mr. Grimes says, then the site is with the RES 3 future land use category, and the southern portion was changed from RES 1 to RES 3 in 2010. Like Rachel mentioned, there are RES 6 in the vicinity of this area and other future land use categories like industrial that create a particular situation in which it's a mixed-use area with the future land use category. The site is surrounded to the north by the Braden River, to the west for uses the Sugar Creek Country Club Resort and Estate that is zoning PDRB, Plan Development Recreational, and to the west for vacant areas that are zoning A1, and to the south for single-family residential, and to the east by single-family residential under A1. Like I said, this is the history of the site, and this is the site plan, like comply with all the current regulation of the Land Development Code. The proposed density is close to 3 dwelling units per acre, and the net density is 3.26, and they're proposing 38% of open space that exceeds the minimum required, that is 25%. There are 8 acres of wetlands, and no impact to wetlands are proposed, and the applicant considered 3.06 acres of recreational area. Here, I mark the access points, and for me, it's really important that the northern portion of the site is proposed a boulevard entrance, and in addition, an emergency access, since the site is with the coastal evacuation area. Other important point is like the applicant get the approval for evacuation plan already at this stage of the planning process, instead to wait to the final site plan approval. There are 3 access to the southern portion, and there are 3 recreational areas, 2 in the northern portion of the site and 1 in the southern portion of the site. Here, you can see the buffers is 20 feet buffer to the northern portion, and like the applicant remarked, there is more or less 55 feet separation between the lots, the property line of the lots, and the adjacent property. And there is a preservation area in the east side and a 50 feet wetland buffer along the river, plus the minimum separation to the river is 100 feet that create a great area for preservation. The southern portion has, like I said, a recreational area and again, a 20 feet roadway buffer and a 25 feet buffer along to the west and south that is exceeding the minimum requirements. The setbacks complying with the land development code, and the minimum lot size is 4,800 with an option to 46, like the applicant remarked, if they decide to increase the roadway buffer. A special approval is required for a project that exceeds 2 dwelling units per acre and the gross density in the RES 3, a net density that exceeds 3 dwelling units per acre in the RES 3 adjacent to a perennial stream, partially with the coastal high hazard and partially with the coastal evacuation area. Staff is analyzing all the proposal, and the proposal comply with all the applicable regulations that are required in order that the board can support the special approval. And a specific approval is requested to pay in lieu of the construction of the sidewalks, since it's an area that is environmental sensitive. Staff consider that the project is appropriated in the area, since it's an area that is transitioning, that there is 38% of open space, that the site has good access along collector roadways, that there are enough or sufficient means of access, and in addition, an emergency access, and the timing is appropriate and adequate setbacks and screening is proposed. The negative aspect is that there is not sidewalk proposed, but the applicant is proposing enter into an agreement to pay in lieu of the construction of the sidewalk between the 39th Street and the east project boundary, and there could be some impacts to the residents along the thoroughfare. However, the staff consider that the project comply with the regulation for screening, and good buffers are proposed, and staff doesn't have any outstanding remaining issues. We receive citizens' comment related to the compatibility with related to the lot size, to the screening buffers, and the traffic in the area. Staff is recommending approval with the stipulations. And if you have any specific questions.
Thank you. Are there any questions for staff? Mr. Horgan.
I had one, and it's because I'm not familiar with the requirements. I see a lot of city on this map. It's a city all, is this completely surrounded by city, or is it adjacent to the city?
No, let me go to all this area the east area is Manatee County, and this portion that is here with the mouse to the west is city property.
adjacent to it?
No, it's not adjacent.
Not
The-
contiguous.
The site is not adjacent to the city.
Okay, that's the only question.
Surrounded entirely by the other properties within the county.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any additional questions for staff? Mr. Roth?
What is the buffer on 39th Street? Is there going to be a wall, or are there trees? or-
Let me go to this. Here, the applicant have 15-feet buffer, but is proposing a fence and is in compliance with the regulation of the Land Development Code that the fence is inside and the screening material is outside to the fence.
What is the screening material?
I refer to the environmental.
We can also get the applicant to clarify their intent, so let's talk about what's required.
I can't hear very
Code
well.
requires, I'm not exactly sure the amount, but based on code, it requires vegetation that's high enough that buffers the.
Got it.
So, when the staff has an opportunity for rebuttal or additional questions, we'll get them to clarify. There's maybe a difference between what's required and what their intent would be, so. Thank you. Any additional questions for staff? I do have a question if nobody else does. And I understand, Mr. Galliano, somehow Mr. Davis convinced you to sit in front of the commission now?
Yes,
Bad flip of the coin.
good morning. My name's Clark Davis. I'm Transportation Planning Division Manager. I've been sitting at the table with you for the last few years, covering the public hearings, and this year Nelson and I are going to start sharing some of those responsibilities. So I don't have a name tag for him yet, but this morning we're introducing Nelson Galliano. He manages one of the two sections within transportation planning, the one that's responsible for performing all the traffic studies. So if you've gone through all the details of our staff reports, you've probably seen his name, and works on our transportation plans. He's a licensed professional engineer in the state of Florida. He's got experience in Florida and in regional planning in other areas in the southern United States. We added him to the team about 3 years ago, so he does have quite a bit of Manatee County experience now, but this is one of the first few times he's appeared in a public hearing or board meeting setting. But we should start seeing him at the table a little bit more often now.
Great. Thank you very much. There was an earlier discussion, a question from Mr. Rutledge regarding 40-foot rights-of-way, and I've heard this discussion in other municipalities and also within Manatee County, and I think some of the concern is when you start reducing rights-of-way, the conditions might be such that you have an application that asks to reduce the roadway width, or there's certain facilities that go within a right-of-way, water, sewer, maybe a reclaim main, something to that effect. And as I've heard at other meetings, sometimes it's not supported by all of staff. For instance, I've heard the waste management folks indicate that it becomes problematic with routing their trucks through a neighborhood that may have trucks or cars parked on it. And I think I've also heard emergency services express the same concern. And I also heard previously that the transportation manual is adopting some of these elements, a smaller, reduced right-of-way, and possibly road widths. What's the criteria for evaluating when these are appropriate? Can you clarify and kind of go into that? I know it's not a one-size-fits-all, literally one size, 50-foot right-of-way, but in some cases, a 40-foot right-of-way might be more appropriate.
Mr. Chair, if you don't mind, I'm going to start this conversation. I'll let Nelson
Okay, thank you.
pick up where I'm going to talk about more on the engineering infrastructure end of things, whether it be for, as you brought up, the utility infrastructure, whether it be public safety, the fire districts, things of that sort. It all plays into the analysis and the review of the parameters for right-of-way width, for pavement width. Certainly what also comes into consideration is sidewalks, things of that sort, which, not to compare apples to oranges, and especially given the agenda today, but as it has already been brought up with the previous project at hand, right off the bat, just from observation of these two projects, the first thing I point out, especially for the northern portion of this project, is that the northern portion of this project is within the coastal high hazard, it's within the 100-year floodplain. There's 100-year floodway, not even just floodplain, but 100-year floodway associated with the Braden River, which is interacting with the northern portion of this project, whereas if you're looking at the southern portion of this project, south of 26th Avenue East, I actually think the preliminary site plan even brings this up, that the northern portion of this project, we're speaking of private streets, whereas the southern portion of this project, we're talking about the possibility for public right-of-way. So that there alone, there are big differences, night and day differences between one side of 26th Avenue East on this project and the other. With respect to the considerations that come at hand for, in particular for the right-of-way width, as you'd brought up, as far as the utility infrastructure, one of the things that was looked at in that previous project was the fact that it's in the Evers watershed overlay. That project couldn't use reclaimed water. So there's part of your utility infrastructure component that's not even included within, say, a right-of-way width, whereas in this particular project, as I brought up, you're not only worried about utility infrastructure, but you have to take into account the public safety aspect, given the location of this project being in a coastal high hazard area. Nelson and Clark, and especially in particular as far as traffic engineering, they've been championing the complete streets concept. There was the amendment to the Public Works Highway Standards last year to incorporate the complete streets concept into the Public Works standards. So that is definitely playing now into what we look at as far as these particular requirements. And I'll let Nelson opine on further design considerations.
Thank you. Nelson Galeano, Transportation Planning, I have concern. When it is about the cross sections, we need to find a balance between speed, block size, and land use. When the speed is too high and the block size is the same, we create an adverse environment for pedestrians and bicycles. In this case, if we have a shorter width on the roadway in a residential area, we decrease a little bit the speed because the block size is too high or too long. That is a good environment for non-motorized mobility, and it matches the complete street policy that the county has, essentially for public safety when pedestrians and bikers are on the roadway.
Thank you. Part of my question is understanding that not everybody agrees with the criteria. I think we have an opportunity. I believe the land development code's being reviewed, and are the roadway manuals referenced to that? That might be a good opportunity to provide some consistency, because I think what becomes problematic is when there's interpretation on some of these applications where you get a situation where it's allowed in one case and not in the other. I think if the criteria were more definitive, it would be helpful. I think it's a benefit. I know that the emergency service folks don't like it in the waste management, but when you reduce the road width, the asphalt, you reduce the impervious surfaces in a community, and it has a benefit. It allows just for more green space. So, but there's trade-off on each side. You're sacrificing one for the other.
And my curiosity is, to a certain extent, you're right, there are two unique components. The south side is much different than the north side. North side has a very sensitive north corner. And my concern is, we have a blanket policy. Well, you're approving this site. Now, you've called it a site as singular, but in reality, they're so unique and so different. My question is, should we look at them uniquely and say, look, we want to protect this particular area and do this here and do this there? I don't know if the code even permits you to do that, but I want to raise the question because I think that's worthwhile. That's really the question of how do we value that water, that special, unique feature that's on that property. I don't bother myself with the code.
Thank you. Any additional questions for staff? Okay, seeing none, we're going to open it up for the public comment portion of the hearing. I have a few speaker cards, so when I call your name, if you would come forward, state your name and that you have been sworn, and you'll be given 3 minutes to make a statement. If you could, please focus on the issues, and the applicant and staff will be taking notes, and will in the staff closing comments and the rebuttal, they'll have an opportunity to address your concerns directly. So the first speaker card I have is Marshall Hall. If you would come forward, state your name and that you have been sworn.
Good morning.
Good morning.
My name is Marshall Hall. I live in Elwood Park and have lived there for quite a few years.
And you have been sworn, sir?
Yes, I have been sworn.
Thank you very much.
My problems with this development are, first off, the density. Right now, the density I see is very nice. It's a wonderful area to live with. The traffic has become, somewhat unbearable. And with this project, it's going to become more unbearable. It's going to be a wonderful site once developed, but its density is overwhelming. It's plunked right in there like a great big double scoop of ice cream on a cake. It stands out. It doesn't fit with the rest of it. I'm concerned about the native flora and fauna. I fished the Manatee River and the Braden River since I was a little boy. I've seen so much change to it. Not bad, but enough change to concern me that a development of this density is going to change a lot of its structure, of the area structure. And of course, the road traffic, you're going to put in a left-hand turn lane and a right-hand turn lane. And what about the rest of it? You can't get around. There's too much traffic. We keep coming up with these developments and we don't do anything to accommodate these cars for development like this on a road. Thank you. I will yield to another gentleman, Mr. Green, that has more information than I have.
Thank you. Thank you. The next speaker card I have is John Zalis. Yes, sir. If you would come forward, state your name and that you have been sworn.
Yeah, my name is John Zalis, and I have been sworn.
Thank you.
I am, excuse me, I am the Vice President of the Sugar Creek Country Club, also representing the traffic committee that is part of Sugar Creek Country Club, Sugar Creek Resorts, Sugar Creek Estates. Our greatest concern is the amount of traffic, the narrow roads, lack of left turn lanes, lack of sidewalks, lack of bike paths. We're very concerned that there's over 800 residents adjacent to the west to this development off of 26th Street. And I'm just here to express those concerns. 39th going out right now is up to the 44th Street corridor. We've been traveling that, and we see if you add 1,300 residents from Glen Creek and then other residents come from the Brandon River development, we see a tremendous amount of traffic moving through those corridors, and we're very, very concerned. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. The next speaker card I have is Mr. Ken Green. If you could come forward, state your name and that you have been sworn.
Good morning, Commissioners. My name is Ken Green. I have been sworn in.
Thank you.
I have some big issues. First of all, let's talk about traffic. Does anyone travel 26 on the Commission? Travel east on there? So you know what the traffic pattern is. Once you pass Sugar Creek Country Club, the speed limit turns into 45 miles an hour. Okay. Also, another traffic issue is 39th Street. That is a very, very narrow street to travel north and south. It's so narrow that if you were to take two school buses side by side, their west coast mirrors are probably going to touch each other. One has to pull off to the side on the right-of-way to allow the other large vehicle to pass. There's a ditch on that western side of 39th from 26th Avenue to 34th Street. It's I understand that the impact fees could affect that, could widen that, which would definitely help. That's one issue, right there. Where is all this 22 acres of water that is proposed on this site going to go? They say it's going to go into the Braden River. Is that correct? How is that going to drain into the Braden River? From all the ponds, from each pond, from on the south end going into the north end, and then draining out through drainage ditches? I'm not aware of where all that water is when we get that 10 inches of rain in 24 hours, which we have had, a few times throughout the county. I've lived in this county for over 35 years. I've done business for over, about that long. So, I have seen flooding in these areas and in my own area and stuff. So that can be a very issue. Also, along this project, all along the north and side, this is in a coastal hazard area that's already been mapped out, where we have on that north quarter, that whole area right there is in a high coastal hazard area, so it is prone to being flooded at times. So the other problem is density. We have immense amount of people being moved into that area. Out of 417 units, we're going to have at least well over 800 people through there that is going to be using those corridor roads back and forth. So, that's going to be a big issue for this area. I am zoned A1, okay, and there's around me, surrounding me, that is what the zoning is right now. So, in order, to this to be, changed to, PDR and having this whole development, this is kind of like an experiment. That's everyone said on the engineering. This is kind of new, so I'm very leery of this project going forward than what it is. Time's up.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you very much. The next speaker card I have is Ramona Self. If you could come forward, state your name and that you have been sworn.
I am Ramona Self, and I have been sworn in.
Thank you.
And I live just east of the development, the 10 acres across on the east side. Between us is a creek that runs from it runs from the Braden River under 26th Avenue and back beyond 34th Street east. And that takes off a tremendous amount of water. In August, when we had the 10 inches of rain, the water flowed over 26th Avenue and was eroding up under the asphalt. I have a picture of the little bridge and the small area that it passes under to go out into the Braden River. My concern is water, on the map that was sent to me, there's a drainage that goes into 39th Street East. 39th Street East, about middle ways, one part of the water flows to the south, the other to the north. When it gets down to the north, it flows across the road, 39th Street, into a ditch that goes along 26th Avenue East and goes to the east into that little creek. I've heard the little creek, and it was called Cowpen Slough. And it does rise. It does flow over 26th Avenue when we have a lot of runoff. And of course, the traffic concerns me also. But I live at 4110 26th Avenue East, which is just across the creek from this development on the east side. and I thank you for listening to me. And if you'll please take these things into consideration when you make your decision, I would appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. Those were all the speaker cards I have, but is there anybody else in the audience who wishes to come forward and speak on this matter? Anyone at all? Okay, seeing no one else come forward, we're going to close the public comment portion of the hearing and open this up for discussion. Mr. Gerstenberger, is the conveyance on the east side of the project, is that a named conveyance?
Mr. Chair, as that was just brought up in a citizen comment, there are basically two systems that are running from south to north on both sides of this project, both the east and the west side of this project, that ultimately drain into the Braden River.
Tom, your mic.
Start over?
Yeah, I will. Take two. As I was saying, Mr. Chair, there are two particular tributaries within this particular area, one being on the eastern side of this project known as Jeff's Cowpen Slough, and the one on the western, actually off-site from this particular project itself, that actually runs through Sugar Creek Mobile Home Park, which is known as Sugar House Creek, and another tributary that runs into Sugar House Creek is Glen Creek. Ultimately, the drainage in this particular area is draining from south to north into the Braden River. One thing to note in comparison and retrospect, this portion of the Braden River, it experiences both riverine flooding from upstream from the Evers Reservoir, yet it also experiences storm surge impacts when we have any type of coastal event vis-a-vis a hurricane or winter storm event. So as far as what I was speaking about earlier, as far as the northern portion of this project being the coastal high hazard area, being within the 100-year floodplain, the 100-year floodplain itself has two components to it in this particular project. It has a storm surge component, which is up to elevation 7, and it also has a riverine component, which is associated with the floodway delineation, which is around 3.5 feet. With respect to Jeff's Cowpen Slough, this particular project, one of the things that was taken and looked at basically from day one was how the project itself would drain, how the project itself would outfall. What was taken into consideration was to get the drainage itself through the project north of 26th Avenue East and up into the Braden River, and not to drain into those flood-prone areas that have already been identified, the one on 26th Avenue East and also Sugar House Creek itself, in particular the mobile home park, which is prone to flooding given the low elevation in the particular area. So as far as the engineering intent in this project, from what you'll see in the preliminary site plan, is you'll see a lot of routing, you'll see a lot of interconnectivity of the stormwater facilities northward towards the Braden River, instead of draining either to the east into Jeff's Cowpen Slough or to the west into Sugar House Creek.
So just to clarify, you're saying that there's no direct discharge from this site into either of those conveyances going to the Braden River?
Mr. Chair, that is correct. The intent is for the drainage to ultimately, as I've mentioned before, ultimately the drainage in this area is draining from south to north in the Braden River. So the engineering intent is for the project itself to outfall into the Braden River.
Right, acknowledging that the actual application to do that hasn't been submitted, the construction plans haven't been submitted, but as you stated, the engineering intent is to do that. And I believe it was presented, I don't know who, if it was from staff or from the applicant, but the idea is that this may alleviate some of the issues that are currently occurring on both of these conveyances, that you're removing water that would discharge typically into these conveyances and moving it past them into the Braden River.
Yes.
Okay.
That would be correct.
Thank you. Mr. Horrigan.
Yes, Tom, again, this is the first time I've heard of Cowpen Slough being this far in towards the city. I mean, and most of the time,
This is Jeff's Cowpen Slough, not the Sarasota one.
this is not the Cowpen Slough that's running through Panther Ridge.
No, it's completely different system. We're speaking of just Cowpen Slough being the tributary of Braden River. What you're referring to is Cowpen Slough, which is along the county line, Manatee-Sarasota County line that ultimately drains into Philippi Creek.
Thank you.
They ran out of names.
I have a question.
Mr. Roth.
This area, the northern part, is in fact in a 100-year flood zone. Is that correct?
Yes, sir, it is.
And does it flood now after a rainstorm and so forth?
The particular area itself, let me bring up two things. First off, the northern portion of the project, it is within the 100-year floodplain. As I brought up, the 100-year floodplain has two components. One being the riverine component, which is the 100-year floodplain is roughly in this area about 3.5 feet. But in turn, there is also a storm surge component to the 100-year floodplain in this area, which is up to elevation 7 feet. As far as the northern portion of the project, we're speaking of an area which is roughly anywhere from, give or take, 6 or 7 feet dropping down. Your contours are dropping down towards the river itself. So the lay of the land in this area, especially when you're looking from 26th Avenue East northward, you're dropping from your 6, 7 feet in elevation down to basically mean sea level.
So it does flood?
Yes.
So then the next question I have is there any stipulation for fill, where you would take a certain and fill this? Is that in the requirement when they build?
Yes. Commissioner Roth, yes. As part of the staff report, the stormwater conditions do require this project to mitigate for floodplain impacts, and the preliminary site plan does also identify a floodplain compensation area in the northern portion of this project.
But we can't guarantee that this area will still not flood under normal conditions, forgetting surge.
Correct. For storm surge, no. For riverine or rainfall flooding, that is where the floodplain mitigation, that's where cup for cup analysis is utilized, is the rainfall and the riverine component of flooding.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Horgan.
Tom, again, is there an elevation, a base elevation, first floor elevation on the home sites called
Yes.
for in the plan?
Yes, Commissioner Horgan. The base flood elevation is that number of 7 that I'm referring to. So as far as a minimum required flood protection elevation, the minimum required flood protection elevation would be 1 foot above the base flood elevation. Therefore, the minimum finished floor elevation of any home site in this particular project would be elevation 8.
Thank you.
Any additional questions for staff? Okay. There were some comments regarding the traffic. I think that was something that was mentioned frequently. These roads, I think, are at least I think it was 39th. Is that the one that goes north-south? 39th, I think, is I don't know if substandard's the correct, but it's not a typical roadway section. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Are there conditions or stipulations that, I know it's a public right-of-way, but with regard to this project, that's not a primary, we wouldn't call that a primary access point, would we?
The level of service of this roadway is D, and it works with 1,300 trips during the peak hour. With the project, we have a traffic volume below this level of service. In this context, there are no capacity issues that we can address with this project.
Meaning there's no
impact.
No impact, okay, thank you. Additional questions for staff? Okay.
Question.
Mr. Roth.
Did you say that the road level was below 7? The flood zone is 7?
As far as the existing roads or the,
Existing road?
I would suspect yes, in this particular area of the, especially as was brought up during citizen comment for the crossing at Jeff's Cowpen Slough, and I also know from historical reference that the crossing at Sugar House Creek would both experience flooding during storm surge events.
And there's no stipulation that we do anything with the road, raise the road?
No, actually, with respect to, and actually, there is a stipulation in a staff report regarding the coastal high hazard for the internal infrastructure, both the streets and for the, in particular, the utility infrastructure itself, whether it be any of the above ground elements, whether it be the fire hydrants, whether it be valves, things of that, those sorts. Those particular items wouldn't need to be above the coastal high hazard elevation itself. So yes, there would be provision for the northern portion of this project that the roads be elevated to the coast to meet the coastal high hazard elevation.
That's within the site, but not on the road?
Not on the exterior roads, as far as 26th Avenue East or on 39th Street itself, no.
Any additional questions for staff? Okay, we're going to go to staff closing comments.
I don't have anything at this time.
Thank you.
I just wanted to follow up on that landscape question.
Oh, yes, I'm sorry.
It was 30, basically a canopy tree every 30 feet. So that's per, for the whole length.
Right. Thank you. And then, again, I did mention that maybe the applicant could add some additional detail with regard to intent, not necessarily with what was required. Mr. Gerstenberger?
Mr. Chair, one additional statement I'd like to make. It was brought up about sidewalks in this particular area. This project, outside of the area that the applicant is requesting specific approval for a payment in lieu of construction of a sidewalk from 39th Street eastward to Jeff's Cowpen Slough itself due to the environmental concerns in this area. The western bank of Jeff's Cowpen Slough in particular, along the project itself, all the way down to 26th Avenue East and beyond, further upstream of that particular crossing, there are mangroves along the shoreline of Jeff's Cowpen Slough, and that was taken into consideration for that specific approval request. Otherwise, this project is providing, it would be constructing sidewalks on both sides of 26th Avenue East from the western project boundary to 39th Street East, and then also down 39th Street East itself along the frontage of the project.
Thank you. All right, we're going to go to the applicant's rebuttal, and again, if she deferred. So with regard to the applicant's rebuttal, could we please address some of those concerns that were brought up during citizen comments, and I think additional clarification regarding the buffering?
Absolutely. First, I want to address drainage, and then I'm going to have Mr. Mulock say a few more things about it. But I want to make sure everyone understands that with this particular site, you have a site that normally has water that runs off it. And so this site has water that is running off it. It's agriculture. It's been running off for many years. And the water that runs off goes in two directions depending on where you are. One into the, what's the name of the creek on the west? Sugar House, thank you. Into Sugar House Creek on the west, and the other one that goes into, and I immediately thought of the other Cowpen Slough too, into Jeff's Cowpen Slough on the east, and then it eventually gets into the Braden River. And the water that's run off has not been slowed down, it hasn't been captured, it hasn't had anything to do with it. It just runs off and goes there and contributes to the water flow in those two streams. What we are doing, and Jeb will give more information on it, what we are doing in this instance are two things. One, well, several things. One, as required of all the projects that we see in here, we are going to capture all our runoff from any impervious, the new streets, the new houses, and we're going to treat it before it goes and leaves the site. And that is something that is not being done today. So the water is treated now before it leaves the site. The second thing is we have a requirement to reduce the flow and speed and so forth of that runoff, which is not being done now. That's why you see all of these lakes that are interacted to do that. But the one thing that is way far above and beyond that, which Jeb will tell you about a little more, is that in this instance, when we started doing this project, we saw and we met with the folks out there, and we learned that they're having problems in those two creeks when they have water. So what Jeb has done and has worked with the staff is design it so that all that runoff that's going into there now off of this site will no longer go into those two streams. It will bypass those streams and end up in the same place, which is the Braden River, but it will bypass those streams. It will have been treated, it will have been slowed down, and it will mean that whatever amount of water was coming off this project and adding to a problem someone downstream may have had will be captured and taken somewhere else, so it can only help the people in Sugar Creek Country Club. And this was something that, in meeting with them, that Jeb went back and made sure that we had that design and worked it so that would have that result. So from your drainage standpoint, without this project, those things would not happen, which is the diverting it to somewhere else and so forth. So we recognized that this was an issue in the area and hit it head on. We didn't try to say, okay, we have a right, we're supposed to maintain current flows and so forth. We hit it head on to make it better for the neighbors. The second thing on the question of the 100-year floodplain. Commissioner Roth, those are very good questions, and they're something that we've done here many, 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 many times, and I've been on projects many, many times over it. And what you have is a site that lies in the 100-year floodplain, which is higher up than the floodway, which you stay out of. But in the 100-year floodplain, what we do is, in designing it, we design the project so that in the post-development, all our homes and everything out there is outside of the 100-year floodplain. We are required to do that, and we will be required to do that design. And what Tom mentioned is that obviously if you put fill in the 100-year floodplain, you are potentially pushing water to somewhere else. So that's why you then dig out in your 100-year floodplain to provide like capacity and like storage so that you don't end up in a situation where the 100-year floodplain gets smaller. It's still able to take care of the same amount of water that it was before. That was Tom's cup per cup. And that is why we have a pond that is designed to take care of that. So we will have to do that. We are doing that. And so the floodplain, I'm trying to answer questions.
You're directly answering some concerns that were brought up by citizens, so I think more information is better, so please.
Okay, thank you. So that is what we are doing on that side. We have, and Jeb will also quickly tell you that the storm surge issue, that is where you would worry about a roadway in the situation, that these roads, both 26th and 39th, are above that slosh model. You may have heard of that. That's where in the event of a storm surge, the water goes up and, it'll go up a creek, it'll go somewhere. These roads are above that. Now, as to the transportation, just a few things on that. We have done the studies. You've heard that we have capacity, we're in compliance, we're doing everything. But we're going beyond that. And if you don't do things with developments as they come in, nothing will ever get fixed. But what we are doing is, adjacent to our site on 39th and Deb will give you the details, and a large part of 26 to our entrance there, we are actually improving those roadways, bringing them up to what we generally call the county standards. I'm not saying they're substandard in the overall sense, because FDOT has rules on 20 feet versus our 24 feet and so forth, but we're bringing them up to the 24 feet where we can, and we are adding turn lanes where needed to help get to that point. Both of those roadways are collector roadways, and therefore they're on your thoroughfare plan, and therefore they are eligible for the county to come in and spend impact fee monies on them to improve capacity to work on them. And so, as Rachel Layton explained, this project will generate about $2 million in impact fees that will go into the district where we are, to be used in the district where we are. And so that's how the new projects start creating a fund to be able to do things with roadways. Without that, it would not happen. As far as the questions were raised with density, I think you saw ad nauseum all of the projects around us where the density is greater. In fact, one of the persons raising question of density is in Sugar, I don't know why I can't say it. Country Club. I think theirs is over 9 units per acre when I read the staff report. And so, you know, I see it all the time. I've been here my whole life, and it's okay. It's okay for me to have 9 units per acre, but it's not okay for you, the McClure family, who's held this for 50 years, to then be able to develop their property within the comprehensive plan at the 3 units per acre. And that's a little troubling to me. But nonetheless, is that, as you can see, our traffic we've taken care of. We're within the comprehensive plan designations. And we are addressing all of those issues with the drainage extensively and doing things to improve the transportation, or the road system. Jeb? I probably said a lot of stuff you would say.
Yeah.
You always do.
Yeah, he makes my job easy. He and Tom. Jeb Mulock, CNS Engineering, and I'm sorry I missed the swearing in. I know this is becoming a bad habit, and I apologize.
That's it.
Swear or affirm that the factual statements and factual representations that you're about to present to the board will be truthful and accurate?
I do, thank you.
You're the first one in 2018 to do that.
I made the record books. Yeah, I think Tom and Caleb have really nailed a lot of the points. I don't want to belabor it too much, but as engineer of record from ZNS, I just wanted to reiterate what has been said already. This project is unique in the sense that we could do the post design in a way to divert the water from, you know, an area that obviously the concern was at Sugar House Creek. So with that, in our conversations with the residents, you know, at the meetings, and then with Tom, you know, we recognize the fact that we could design to have a real positive impact on the flooding. Therefore, that's why we proceeded that way. And it's not per the standards of what we normally design. Normally, we have to follow historical drainage patterns. So in this case, it's unique because we're right on the Braden River, and we think we can have a real positive impact. So, and we've done that, and the design at this point is done. So we know we've locked it in at this point what it's going to be. Now we still have to go through a review process, so there's a lot to come. But the design right now has been made. The only thing I guess I would add, and I just wanted to, I don't think anybody at this point has shown an illustration of what we're talking about, so I just kind of created this exhibit real quick to show you And this is just a highlighted version of what's already on record. This is part of the preliminary site plan that was submitted. What you see highlighted in blue is Sugar House Creek to the west there. And the arrows on our site plan are showing basically the outfall location. So you can see these two here are flowing back through our design system and then would cross under 39th and stay within, or no, that's 39th there. 39th is this one here.
I thought you were talking about up here.
Yeah, and then under 26, correct. So basically, all the historical flow as it flows right now goes to 26th and 39th and then flows to Sugar House Creek. We would divert that and obviously lessen volumes, rates, et cetera, to Sugar House Creek. Does that make sense? So, like I said, I don't want to belabor it too much. I think Tom and Caleb have really nailed it, but I think showing this illustration helps you understand a little bit more.
Yeah.
Thank you. And then finally, we would like to hear from the traffic consultant. Hate for you to come to a meeting and not get a chance to speak, so.
Michael Yates, White House Group, and I have been sworn.
Thank you.
Did you have a specific question, or I can go through what we
You
did
heard
and how we-
many of the concerns are related to traffic or transportation. I'd just like to hear
Absolutely.
testimony regarding this.
Yeah, we went through the TIA process on this project. What we did was we analyzed 2020 build-out volumes. So based on that, we are less than 35, there's 35% capacity still remaining on 26 and over 50% on 39th at 2020. So the 2020 volumes include our project, existing peak season traffic, and any vested traffic within the area. So in addition to link volumes, we also looked at all the intersections within our study area, and all those operate at acceptable level of service, and all the movements have a V over C less than 1 through the 2020 build-out. So based on our analysis, all the driveways work at acceptable level of service, all the intersections work at acceptable level of service, and all the links operate at acceptable level of service, and there's still available capacity.
Thank you. Thank you. All right, that concludes the extended rebuttal. Mr. Horgan.
I did have one question on something that Mr. Grimes brought up that wasn't in the earlier presentation. You're talking about you're treating the water that's discharged into the Braden River. How's that being done?
And Jeb can probably better answer, but we do it through the pond system. That's what they're made for, is that the water goes into there and it's held so that you have treatment in
So
it.
the traditional littoral shelf.
Traditional method of treatment. We're not.
I thought there might have been something different.
And for clarification, that is the state requirement for water quality. So. All right, thank you. Again, that concludes the extended rebuttal.
Question, Mr. Chair. I guess this is for Jeb. You got a quick second?
All right.
With the amount of fill, I'm looking at flood zones, and I'm assuming that the north section is in the AE, correct?
That's correct, yes.
Okay. With the amount of fill that you're bringing into the north section, would that bring that out of the floodplain where you could file a LOMAR to bring that
Yes.
into the X zone?
Yeah, absolutely, and that's a great point. In the post conditions, they would be considered outside of the 100-year floodplain.
All right, just for a matter of procedure, we typically try to ask those questions before we do the rebuttal, so let's, we'll allow it now. There was a lot of discussion, but let's try to make the rebuttal the last testimony in the public hearing. So we're going to close the public hearing, and we'll go to deliberation or discussion. Are there any issues that require discussion? Mr. Rutledge.
Mr. Gerstenberg, you know my question.
Well, again, the public hearing is
So the
closed.
question is, will the surrounding
Bring your mic up.
residents and will the Braden River, with this collection process and the quote treatment process, improve the conditions versus what they are now?
We can't have any additional testimony after the public hearing has been closed.
That would be the thought I would have.
But,
Earlier.
you know, I as a drainage engineer, practicing engineer, I very seldom see projects that reroute drainage basins, and I think this is a unique situation and an opportunity to improve a situation. It's something that you don't see frequently, that where many times you'll hear an applicant say something like they're not required to improve a condition, but this is a project where I think we've heard the applicant actually make the statement that it will, which is pretty unusual coming from an applicant. But I think in testimony we've heard, I think this is one of the positives for this project, and I think it's something that is going to provide benefit to the community.
Significant, right?
Well, I am an engineer. I'm not going to qualify that as significant.
But where did you sleep last night?
No. Any other discussions, deliberations? So, okay, if there's no.
I'll make a motion.
Okay, Mr.
Mr. Chairman, based on the staff report, evidence presented, comments made at the public hearing, and finding the request to be consistent with the Manatee County Comprehensive Plan and the Manatee County Land Development Code as conditioned herein, I move to recommend approval of the Manatee County zoning ordinance number PDR 17-07 ZP, approval of a preliminary site plan with stipulations A1 through 4, B1 through 9, C1 through 5, D1, E1, E2, granting special approval for a project, number 1, exceeding the gross density of 2 dwelling units per acre in a Res 3 future land use category. Number 2, exceeding a net residential density of 3 dwelling per unit in the RES 3 future land use category. Number 3, adjacent to a general stream. Number 4, partially within the coastal high hazard area overlay district. Number 5, within the coastal evacuation area overlay district. And number 6, structures located within the 25-year flood plan. Adoption of the findings for specific approval and granting specific approval for an alternative to Land Development Code Section 1001.6.A.1.A, requiring new developments to construct 5-foot sidewalks along both sides of all new or existing major thoroughfares, as recommended by staff.
Thank you. We have a
And
motion.
Mr. Chair, just for clarification, it's perennial stream. You intended perennial stream, correct? You said general stream.
Oh, correct. Great.
Okay, just clear. Okay, thank you.
Very good. The motion is made as stated. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Mr. Ron, is there any additional discussion before we call the matter to vote? Seeing none, I'll call the matter to vote. The motion to vote, all those in favor say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Opposed, like sign. Chair votes aye, motion passes 7-0. And I believe that concludes our business for today. Mr.
be watching, gentlemen.
Mr. Gerstenberger, we have we've had a lot of discussion recently regarding stormwater and flooding and stuff like that. At one point, we had talked about having a workshop to discuss that. Have you had an opportunity to put something together? If you could, take it outside. Have you had an opportunity to look at maybe putting something together where we can have a discussion, work session that is, where we can have a dialogue relative to just some of the things we typically see come before the commission?
Mr. Chair, I'm looking at either February or March for a work session.
Okay.
So we'll finalize that with the Land Development Services and schedule that in for the upcoming agendas.
Very good. Thank you very much. Thank you. I think it would be appreciated if we could have a dialogue without the constraints of a public hearing. Thank you. All right. Are there any other matters to address? We're going to call the meeting closed. Adjourned.
I gotta go back.
Good.